Hi, everyone. Welcome to this conversation. As people join in, please share in the comments where you are joining us from. Also, throughout the course of the conversation, please feel free to share your questions and comments throughout the webinar. My name is Neha Matthew Shah, and I work with the Sierra Club's International Climate and Policy Campaign. I'm based in Berkeley, California, occupied territory of the Ohlone, Chochenyo, and Muwekma nations. The panel joining us today is from the US and India. We'll be introducing each of them through the course of the conversation. We've had a few changes to our panel, unfortunately, due to family emergencies and might have a few network issues, but we will carry forward nonetheless. So again, as we get started, I just wanted to set and ground us all in what's happening today. Today is Earth Day in the US, which historically, over 50 years ago, was inspired by the civil rights movement. Earth Day was about the grassroots and localized actions across the country, which is why this conversation is so important for us to have today. Also, as of yesterday, India recorded the highest daily coronavirus case count in a single country since the pandemic began. We're especially here today thinking about the many people who've been impacted. I know many of whom are interconnected through this work with some of our speakers today. I'm especially thinking about what one of our speakers today, Sandeep Singh, shared, that despite these hard times and during the time of COVID, we don't give up. And folks have been fighting for their cause without giving up until their pleas are heard. We're also meeting at the same time that US President Joe Biden convenes a climate summit with some 40 world leaders, including leaders from India, Japan, Bangladesh, and several other countries. The summit's purpose is to address the impacts of climate change, and they're saying to galvanize efforts by the major economies to tackle the climate crisis. We're here today to elevate a grassroots issue that has been a climate, health, labor, environmental justice crisis for over a decade. This issue connects us, especially from the US to India, and it needs our action and our attention. The issue is the Sasan coal power project, which is based in the Singrauli district of Madhya Pradesh, India. If you're here from the US, you may be asking, I don't really know where that is, and how could I possibly have anything to do with this? As is the case with the Sasan power project in Singrauli, US government agencies like the US Export-Import Bank finance certain projects around the world. US Exim Bank was one of the financiers of the Sasan coal plant. The coal plant itself is operated by the company Reliance. The Sasan Ultra Mega Power Project is one of the world's largest integrated power generation and coal mine projects. The US Exim Bank originally financed the plant in 2010 with more than $900 million in US taxpayer money and has taken little to no action in responding to the numerous complaints and corruption, human rights and labor violations, as well as at least 37 deaths over the past decade. In this moment today, we are holding this conversation and have many more conversations planned ahead to demand action from our world leaders, specifically to end fossil fuel finance overseas. So here today on this webinar, we have several speakers, including Sandeep Singh of the Union of the Displaced People in Sasan, Anuradha Munshi from the Center for Financial Accountability, and Joe Atiyali from the Center for Financial Accountability, Shripad Dharmadhikari from Manthan Adhyayan Kendra, Maureen Nandini Mitra from Earth Island Journal, Neil Tangury from Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, and Kate DeAngelis from Friends of the Earth. Thank you all so much for your time, and we really, really appreciate the time, energy that you put in not only into this conversation, but to all the work that goes on behind the scenes and all that you do. We're also here to amplify the anniversary of a coal ash dam break that happened at Sasan almost exactly a year ago, which further devastated the Singrauli region. This massive coal ash flood from the Sasan coal-fired power plant and mine last spring killed 6 people, including 3 children, destroyed 6 miles of crops and homes, polluted downstream rivers and fields, and impacted hundreds of people in 3 nearby villages. This breach is reported to be due to the negligence of the plant operator, which again is Reliance. We're here today to demand the US hold Exim Bank equally responsible for its role in this Sasan coal ash disaster and the inaction afterwards. And we require the necessary remediation and compensation in the aftermath of this flood. So to give a primer and to really take our audience to the ground in Singrauli, we want to share a video that the Center for Financial Accountability has put together. It may be hard to hold your attention through a video through this webinar, but I really encourage you to watch and hear the statements, to see the pictures, because there's a lot of work that's gone into this, and it really takes us on the ground to Singrauli, where all of this has been happening. So if we can start the video. I'm not able to hear audio.
Sasan Ultra Mega Power Project is a 3,960 megawatt coal-based power plant in Singrauli district in the state of Madhya Pradesh in India. Apart from being financed by a number of Indian banks, other financiers include Export-Import Bank of United States and China Exim Bank. The scale of the project can be understood from the fact that the project and the coal mine together involve almost 10,000 acres of land, of which almost 7,000 acres is for the coal mines. Ever since its inception, the project has been marred by serious environmental and social impacts, from the issues of displacement, land acquisition through coercion, accidental deaths of workers. There has been a serious misconduct in the manner in which the project has gone ahead. After a complaint was filed to the Office of Inspector General of the US Exim Bank, the report that came out in 2015 revealed 19 fatalities at the project site. 8 more deaths occurred subsequently. On April 10, 2020, the fly ash dam for the Sasan coal plant burst due to the negligence of the authorities. This caused a flood of toxic waste which ran through adjacent villages, washing through thousands of acres of land and destroying agricultural crops and fields and killing 6 people, which included 3 children.
पिछले साल 10 अप्रैल को रिलायंस का स्टेम टूटा था। उसके पूर्व में भी हम लोग समस्त ग्राम पंचायत के और रिलायंस के विस्थापित मिलकर के धरना दिए थे, जिसमें 11 सूत्री मांग थी, जिसमें हम लोगों का पहला सूत्री मांग था कि रिलायंस का स्टेम निम्न घटिया किस्म का बना हुआ है जो कभी भी टूट सकता है, और जस धरना के 2 से 2.5 महीने बाद वो डैम टूट जाता है। और उसके ऊपर हम लोग उसके पहले धरना प्रदर्शन, जिसमें रिलायंस प्रबंधक एवं कलेक्टर के द्वारा एक तहसीलदार के माध्यम से टीम गठित की गई थी। वो टीम लिखित में हम लोगों का दिया था कि बांध अपने पैमाने पे बना हुआ है, बांध कभी नहीं टूटेगा। लेकिन उनके पेची विभाग के अधिकारी थे, रिलायंस के इंजीनियर थे, तहसीलदार साहब थे। उसके बाद डैम टूट जाता है। डैम टूटने के बाद 6 लोगों की मृत्यु होती है। 1000 से 1500 का जो खेत होता है जिसमें राखड़ पड़ जाता है, गाय बैल भैंस पेड़ पौधा तरह तरह का बहुत नुकसान होता है। उस नुकसानी के बाद भी जो पीड़ित परिवार था, जो 6 लोग मरे थे, उनको भी पूर्ण रूप से मुआवजा की राशि नहीं दिया जाता है। जो किसान थे, जो विस्थापित भाई थे, जिनकी 1 से 1500 की फसल बर्बाद हुई, उनकी फसल का दाम नहीं मिला सही ढंग से। उनका जो नुकसानी हुआ था, उस नुकसानी का भरपाई नहीं किया गया। सैकड़ों 200, मुझे लगता है 200-250 से गाय बैल भैंस बकरी मरे थे, उनका भी नुकसान नहीं दिया गया। और आज तक उन विस्थापित भाइयों को, किसानों को, मजदूरों को न तो उनको मुआवजा का राशि दिया गया, न तो उनका जो नुकसानी हुआ था नुकसानी दिया गया। और जो पानी, डैम का पानी निकला था, राखड़ था, जो राखड़ गया था, यहाँ से लगा हुआ है गोभिया नदी। गोभिया नदी से जो एक नदी है, रेहन डैम है, उस रेहन डैम में पानी चला जाता है। रेहन डैम का पानी नगर निगम की जो सिंगरौली जिले की 11 लाख की आबादी है, उस डैम के पानी से पूरा आबादी जीवित है, उससे पानी पीता है। लेकिन जो वही नगर निगम उसी पानी को फिल्टर करके पूरे शहर के अंदर सप्लाई करता है। तो लोगों को, मुझे लगता है कि जो सिंगरौली जिले की आबादी है, उस पानी से भी बड़े स्तर पे प्रभावित हुए हैं और तरह तरह की बीमारियां भी उत्पन्न हो रही है। न तो जिला प्रशासन के लोग, न तो एनजीटी के लोग, न तो हाई कोर्ट, न तो सुप्रीम कोर्ट, न तो यहाँ का प्रशासन, स्थानीय प्रशासन किसी भी तरह का, न तो रिलायंस के ऊपर कोई दंड लगाया, न तो कोई जुर्माना किया। तो ये कहाँ का न्याय है, कहाँ का न्याय संगत की बात होगी जब किसान मजदूर अपना जमीन देता है, घर देता है, उनको कुछ विस्थापित होंगे तो उनको नौकरी मिलेगा, लेकिन ऐसा न हो रहा है। दोबारा दूसरे स्तर पे डैम टूटता है, लोग भी परेशानी हो रही है। 1000 से 1500 एकड़ का जमीन का रकबा जो था, जो डैम के आसपास का पूरा इलाका था, पूरा पानी में डूब गया था और बह गया था। लोगों को 2000, 3000, 4000, 5000 पर एकड़ के हिसाब से मुआवजा दिया। जो रिलायंस के लोग आकलन किए थे 780 का किए थे, लेकिन वो एक चौथाई भाग था। 1/4 जी, ज्यादा। हाँ, उसका 4 गुना था। जिनकी मौत उनके परिवार को क्या मिला? उनके परिवार को एक व्यक्ति को सिर्फ नौकरी दिए हैं, न तो उनके दादाजी को, न तो चाचा जी को, जिनका घर बह गया था। उनके जिनके एक पति मरे थे, एक औरत थी, उनका एक बच्चा मरा था, एक पति मरा था, सरकारी टीचर थे, उनको भी मुआवजा राशि नहीं मिला है। और बाकी लोगों को तो भूल जाइए, जो संतुष्ट परिवार था, जिनका मुआवजा का राशि 1 करोड़ 60 लाख रुपए बना था, लिखित में बना था, उसके बावजूद भी कुछ यहाँ के स्थानीय विधायक और जिला प्रशासन को काम करा दिए थे। उससे भी हम लोग लड़े थे, समस्त ग्राम पंचायत के लोग, विस्थापित परिवार संघ के जो संगठन है विस्थापितों का, उनके माध्यम से भी हम लोग लड़े थे, लेकिन नया नहीं मिल पाया, नहीं हो पा रही। उस जमीन में तो राखड़ बढ़ गया ना, 5 फीट 7 फीट 8 फीट, तो उसमें फसल करना बहुत मुश्किल काम है। दलदल होता है, जितना नीचे तक गया वहां तक फसल हो ही नहीं सकता, जल जाता है। ठीक, हो जाता है सर, खरीदत ना पड़ता। अच्छा, अब क्या स्थिति है? आदमी रहता है घर खाने के। अच्छा, खरीदाई खवाई? हाँ, ये अपने जमीन है सर, वहाँ है पोल, पूरा जगह है वैसे खाली, पूरा खेत देखिए पूरा बंजर हो गया है, तब्दील हो गया है, हरे भरे जमीन जो है जहाँ पर फसल होता था चौपट हो गया है। तो पूरा गांव का ही इसी तरह एरिया है। आप इलाके में कहीं भी नजर दौड़ा लेंगे, तमाम जगहों पर इसी तरह आपको तस्वीर हर जगह दिख जाएगी। सैकड़ों एकड़, हजारों एकड़ बता रहे हैं कि जमीन बर्बाद हो गई है, और इसका ना तो फिर से दोबारा इस जमीन के लिए बंजर हो चुकी है, तो उसको इसके लिए कुछ उपाय नहीं किए गए, क्योंकि जगह जगह पर जमीनों में राख अभी भी पटे हुए हैं। देखिए, आप दूर तक नजर रखिए, वहां भी आपको दिख जाएगा कि किस तरीके से राखड़ पड़ा हुआ है।
अहिरे राखड़ लागल है वह गेहूं बह गल बा जमा गेहूं बह गल है वो जमीनिया पटर गेल है रखड़े में ना।
अच्छा, तो अभी सुधार हुआ कुछ जमीन का?
सुधार कहाँ होला सा ये जमीन तो हमरा लगा सा तो सुधार कहाँ होला ये देखी तो हम घुस के खाली कितना रखड़े में पटरल बा।
अभी भी राखड़ है?
हाँ, ये हम ही के खेत लगे।
हाँ, तो कोनो अब खेती नहीं दोबारा हो पा रही?
नहीं, दोबारा खेती नहीं हो सकती।
इसमें जो घटना हुई थी जिसमें जो भी मृतक थे उनको वहीं पर मुआवजा दिया गया था। साथ ही जो फसल आसपास के गांवों में फसल और पशु का था उसमें एक विशेष टीम से जांच करवाकर मुआवजा दिया गया था, जिसका रिलायंस प्रबंधन द्वारा बताया गया कि इसका पेमेंट पूरा हो चुका है। साथ ही एक मजिस्ट्रेट जांच भी इसमें हुई थी जिसका निर्णय हो चुका है और उसके तहत कार्रवाई चालू है।
कोई अलग टीम बाहर से कोई इसके जांच करने आई?
नहीं, इसमें जिला प्रशासन की टीम थी जिसमें तहसीलदार द्वारा जो भी नुकसानी हुई थी उसका विस्तृत जांच की गई, एक स्थल निरीक्षण किया गया और उसके बाद उसका मुआवजा तय करके प्रबंधन को राशि प्रेषित भेजी गई थी, जिसका उनके द्वारा यह आया है कि उन्होंने सभी व्यक्तियों को इसका भुगतान कर दिया गया। अब इसमें आसपास के जो 2-3 गांव थे उनमें नुकसानी तो हुई थी और चूंकि इसका आंकड़ा अभी वर्तमान उपलब्ध नहीं है मेरे पास भी, लेकिन जी हाँ, जुर्माना पूरा मुआवजा दिया गया था इनको और जो भी संभव है उसका परीक्षण किया गया था, उसका मुआवजा उनको दिया गया है कंपनी के द्वारा। इस संबंध में लगातार प्रबंधन को निर्देशित किया गया है और भी दूसरी जो टीमें आई थी एनजीटी की, उन्होंने भी उनको निर्देशित किया है कि वह यथासंभव चीजों को सामान्य स्थिति में लाने का प्रयास करें।
टोटल कितना मुआवजा मिला 3 लोग के बीच में?
मुआवजा देने नहीं आ बताइए सर।
कुछ नहीं मिला?
पूछे का जमीन का नहीं मिली।
काहे के मिला मुआवजा?
पहले प्लांट आला तब यहाँ जो रखड़वा पटर रहा पहले शुरुआत में मशीन जिससे आवे लगली ने।
ये साल नहीं मिला?
ये साल के ये नहीं मिला।
ये जो डैम फुटल के बाद नहीं मिला?
नहीं, डैमवा फुटल है देखी थोड़ा बहुत उहर के जमीनिया के दे देवा नहीं ये देखी
इधर के नहीं मिला।
नहीं, रुपये वाला
तो कह रहे ना 1 करोड़ 5 लाख के कहा कि 58 लाख पैसा मिलल, 58 लाख था मिलल, 12 लाख छोटा वाला लड़का की, 10 लाख हमरे की मिलल। तीनों आदमी की नौकरी कह रहे हैं तो हम कहीं की नौकरी हम नहीं लेंगे, हमको जीवन भत्ता दिया जाए तो हम लोग भत्ता देता नहीं। वह 8,500
उससे
हाँ
कितना बोले रहा
वो है भत्ते बोले 8,500। बड़ा वाला लड़का की 30,000 तक का नौकरी दे कह रहा तो 15,000 देता नहीं। यार नंदलाल की कुछ नहीं मिला नौकरी, उसको देने के लिए बोला था विकास।
क्या कहना कि तैसा हमारा अपना मवेशी रहना है, मवेशी के बाद में हम क्या कहना कि हम लोग था नहीं चलत रहा, हम एकदम जा गोड़े गिरा थी कि हम लोग कुछ मिल जा, थोड़ा ये नहीं है कि हम लोग कितना मिल जाए हम लोग संतुष्ट हो जा, कितना हम लोग प्रयास हो जाए, कितना हम पाए रहे, कितना हम मवेशी हम बचाए रही जियाए रही ना, कितना मिल गलवा। एनर की नौकरी देवा की कह रहा था ये नहीं ले नौकरी एक जाए तो दूसरे की नौकरी रहता, कम से कम उन्होंने की मजदूरी बढ़ा दी, नौकरी नहीं मिलते।
तो अधिकारी यहाँ नहीं आते हैं हटाने के लिए इसको? कोई
अधिकारी नहीं कहाँ के पूछा था, कोई नहीं पूछा।
अभी आते हैं तो वो अपन ऐसा देख कर फोटो कैमरा करके चल जाते हैं सर, कोई के नहीं सुनने वाला,
कुछ नहीं होता सुनवाई।
Thank you for playing that. I think some of the hardest parts of that video is hearing people come and take photos, but no one's really listening. No one listens to us. For a lot of us that are activists in the space, this is not a new story. These kinds of situations are happening all over the globe. And I think what we're trying to do here today, though, is ask for accountability and realize that that accountability needs to happen and some part from the US government and from US Export-Import Bank. So without further ado, I do want to move to hearing from some of the speakers and other folks on the panel today. It does look like we have network issues and connection issues. We were hoping to bring Sandeep Singh, who was one of the individuals who spoke from the Union of the Displaced People in Sasan in the video. We may still be able to have Sandeep on, but due to network issues, likely won't be able to have Sandeep on. In any case, we do have a few folks from India still on the call who work closely with the communities on the ground. Both Joe and Shripad, and I know Anu as well is on the line. So Joe and Shripad, if each of you could introduce yourselves, introduce your organizations a little bit, and also share with us, what are you hoping you can see from this call today? What's happening on the ground?
Hi, my name is Joe Atiali. I work with Center for Financial Accountability. I'm based in New Delhi. We have been working with the communities in Sasan for close to a decade now. What we are seeing on the ground is a total apathy from the company, government, and the investors in the project. Let's put the Sasan project in a context. It's the third generation of people in Singrauli who is facing the burnt-out displacement. In the 1960s, the Rihen Dam displaced people from 142 villages. Nobody has any record of how many families got affected. In the 80s, coal mining started, and with that, new thermal power plants came, displacing at another time. World Bank funded one of the earliest thermal power plants there, paving way for many more over the years. In 2007-8, along with another mega thermal power plant in the western state of Gujarat called Tata Mundra project, Sasan also got clearance. There are a number of issues related to the Sasan project that can be broadly categorized as social, environment, and labor related. Displacement of over 6,000 people is the foremost. They are not compensated or might have compensated below the legally required levels. The entire process of land acquisition has been marred with false promises and coercion. Communities' property has been destroyed before the clearance and acquisition process were even completed, as has happened in the village of Harawa, where the ash pond is located. Shoddy job of rehabilitation. They have been rehabilitated nearly 35 kilometers away from their earlier villages. The rehabilitation colonies were lacking in basic amenities such as water pumps and schools, access to roads and farming areas. Water pollution, diversion of valuable irrigated agricultural land, etc. are other issues. Among the environmental hazards, coal dust on plants, water bodies, air quality in the area being very poor as the wind blows, coal dust and ash affecting the air quality. Ash pond water seeps into the groundwater, making it hazardous. And this is not just of Sasan. As I said, there are a number of projects in the area, a number of thermal projects in that area. It's very difficult to kind of define the environmental damages caused by one particular project. And the authorities knew about it in advance, and they failed to kind of do a cumulative impact assessment of projects there. The projects also kind of caused the deforestation of around 7,000 acres of forest land in that area. There are a number of labor violations reported in the past many years. Many years back, when the project was still under construction, a smokestack collapse reportedly killed around 30 workers. The number is hugely underreported. And the disappearance of community members who protested forced relocations. There are reported irregularities in worker time stamps where workers were clocked in after their shifts, allowing injuries and deaths at the project to be recorded as having taken place outside of the site. Workers handling toxic materials such as coal ash have reported skin diseases, suggesting necessary safety precautions were not taken. The hiring of contract workers from other states has made it easy to cover up accidents, as families do not reach Singrauli to look for the loss of loved ones until long after these incidents occur. The Office of the Inspector General of the US Exim Bank reported 19 deaths of laborers by 2015, while there were more deaths after that. This is generally where the Sasan project stands and what has caused until the dam collapsed, the ash dike collapsed. And we have just heard about what has caused after the ash dike collapse.
Thanks,
Back to you,
Joe.
Neha.
Yeah, can you speak a little bit to the demands that are being made, particularly by the Union of the Displaced People? And also, what are the demands that we have of US Exim? You just shared a little bit about how the US Exim Bank has been engaged with this Officer of Inspector General before, but what are the overarching demands right now?
Mainly, people are asking for compensation for loss that they have faced. I mean, as you have seen, the agricultural land is yet to be kind of cleaned. It still has residue of the ash which has kind of spilled over. It's not possible to kind of farm on that. It needs to be cleaned. They need to be kind of compensated adequately. As it is mentioned over in the video as well as otherwise, this is not the first accident which is happening there. Time and again, there has been multiple accidents taken to task. I mean, they have never been held accountable for the lapses that they have committed. The local administration, the local government, and the company seem to be hand in glove, that they don't even take action against the company. Despite 6 people dying in this ash dike breach, the company has not been kind of taken to task. There is no exemplary action taken on the company, and hence that's in a way allowing the company to kind of continue with the violation. So one, the compensation, and another, the company needs to be kind of held accountable to what they have done. Particularly on the US Exim Bank. US Exim Bank is financing this, and hence they cannot kind of wash their hands off. They are culpable in this, they are complicit in this. The loss of lives, the loss of livelihood, the investors are equally complicit in this. Despite we raising issues with the US Exim Bank since 2014, when a host of local, national, and international civil society organizations raised complaint with the US Exim Bank, raising the issues of livelihood, of deaths of the laborers, and multiple things. They haven't kind of taken action against it. 2015, they did kind of send a team to India. They refused to go to the villages and meet the people. Instead, they wanted a small group of people, representatives, come to their business hotel and meet, where the company officials usually kind of hang around. They moved around all of the area with the company officials and the police. They even wanted to use the facilities of the company, like the helicopter. It's only the bad weather which didn't allow them to kind of use the helicopter facility that particular day. So all in all, there was a clear message going from the Exim Bank officials with whom they stand. And the report did betray that bias. the report talked about the currency fluctuation and all those kind of things, and only less than 1/3 of the report talks about the lives and livelihood of the people. They reported, thankfully, at least 19 deaths, and that's hugely underreported. But they have not taken any action after that. Not something that we know, nor anybody knows about it. They did report about it, but no action was taken thereafter. This, in a way, encouraged company to kind of go ahead with all these violations when even the investor is not taking care of it. The government is not taking care of it. Even the investor is not taking care of it. That has been a encouragement for the company to kind of go ahead with this. So Exim Bank is complicit in the things which has happened. The least they can do is to kind of ask tough questions to the company. Stop further disbursement of the money if there is anything left. We don't know whether there is anything left to kind of disperse. But at least as investors, they need to kind of ask the hard questions and take actions rather than letting the company to continue with these violations. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks, Joe. There's one interesting question that's come up in the comments, just that is this issue getting much attention, and has it gotten much attention over the past years in national or international press?
Sripad would be able to talk more about it, but I'll just mention that in the national press, only when there is an accident of any of those kind of incidences, it is getting reported. Otherwise, I mean, the Sasan project is not there in the media and in the national debate. Sasan is also not just one of the projects doing these violations. There are a number of other projects which is kind of doing similar kind of violations, and people are struggling against it. So once in a while, those struggles also kind of get mentioned, but Sasan alone doesn't get the required space in the media and in the national debate always, except for times of accidents.
Thanks, Joe. Maybe we'll move to Shripad really quickly. Shripad, if you want to introduce yourself and your organization, and then it would be good to hear from you a little bit more about what happened prior to the breach itself happening. Our understanding, even through this video, is that the community had already raised concerns about this sort of breach happening, that it had happened in the past. So can you share a little bit more about what has been happening even prior to the coal ash dam breach? It's still on mute.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you, Neha, and thanks to everybody who is part of this webinar. Let me first briefly introduce myself and then go straight to the question which you have raised. So my name is Shripad Dharmadhikari, and I work with a group called Manthan Adhyayan Kendra. I am a researcher and an activist working on a broad range of issues connected to water and water policy, water projects. And Manthan is essentially an analysis and advocacy organization. We do studies and analysis of many of these key questions, and then of course being a part of campaigns and doing sort of advocacy and activism around those issues. We've been following issues of the impact of coal, particularly its impact on water, for I think close to a decade now, if not more. And I will say that from all the kind of horror stories we have seen over the last many years, this one is really one of the worst, because fly ash disasters do take place with a fair bit of regularity, but this one, of course, not only killed 6 people, but unfortunately, this was something which was just waiting to happen, and this was something which I think everybody knew was going to happen, and yet nothing was done to prevent it. And in fact, that is what I would like to talk about a little bit. Look at what happened before this accident actually took place. So this fly ash, bursting of the fly ash deposit, the wall, which the retention wall, took place in April last year. But actually, this has been a disaster that was waiting to happen. It was a disaster that was known to be likely to happen. And over the whole year before that, we have had explicit warnings of gross violations, which led to the risk of this kind of disaster. Explicit warnings from the State Pollution Control Board, from the district authorities, from the local communities, and also as a part of the legal proceedings in the National Green Tribunal, which is India's sort of highest environment court. I'll just quickly mention some of these because I think that is important. So, though we talk about this as a ash dike burst, really the ash discharge came from what is called as the dumping of ash on low-lying land. And the company had got permission to. This was not really strictly an ash dike in a classical sense, where you dump ash slurry, but this was a deposition of the ash on low-lying land, and they had to take special permission for that. And they were allowed to deposit ash only in the dry form, and they had to deposit and keep compacting it. And yet, instead of putting it in the dry form, which of course I think probably is more expensive, takes more effort, they just made a slurry and put it in, and naturally the wall was not able to take that pressure. As early as March 2019, that is more than a year before this disaster, the State Pollution Control gave a notice to the Sasan company. I'll just read 2 lines from the notice, so I think it's clear what was being said. Whereas you were given permission for the filling and reclamation of the low-lying areas in the industry premises with fly ash by filling of ash in the dry form and compacting it. Yet, the industry started filling the low-lying area with fly ash in the slurry form, which was found to be a violation of the conditions of permission, and therefore a show cause notice has been given to you. Whereas despite the above show cause notice and subsequent legally binding conditions, the industry has willfully and knowingly failed to comply. And it is precisely this retaining wall of this dump which broke, and the ash also could spread so much, and because it was in a slurry form, whereas it was actually supposed to be in a dry form. So this is the absolute criminal violation, I would say. This was in March 2019. Subsequently, in October 2019, the local communities, about which Sandeep Singh has spoken in the video which we saw, the local community was fearing exactly this kind of disaster, and they launched a long protest action which went on for 18 days. There were several other demands, but ultimately after the 18th day, there was a kind of agreement to address those demands. The first demand was their apprehension that this dam retention wall is going to break. So the district administration and the company, they set up a small committee which was supposed to go and look at it. It was not a technical committee, or maybe it was not at least an independent committee. And that committee gave a clean chit and said, oh, everything is fine, nothing's to be worried about. But exactly 3 months after that, the wall broke. So obviously that committee seems to have, been manipulated, or some other considerations have played a part. At the same time, around the same time, the National Green Tribunal was hearing a whole series of cases about fly ash and fly ash disposal in the entire area, where there are many other power plants also. As a part of that, it set up a committee. And one of the things that the committee did is asked all the power plants to do a third-party inspection of the stability of the retention walls for their ash dikes. Structural stability, and just to ensure that it is not prone to the risk of breaking. In spite of repeated reminders, the committee has noted as late as October 2019 that Sasan power plant had not got the third-party inspection done. So we don't know, why they didn't get it done. But if it had been done, it would have most likely indicated some of these things as an early warning sign. But unfortunately, no action was taken in spite of all of this. The district administration has also been sending them some notices here and there before the disaster happened. So what we have is a picture that the regulatory agency, the State Pollution Control Board, the district administration, the tribunal, the local community, everybody had flagged that this wall is likely to break. And yet nothing happened. The question is, of course, the industry knew, but did the Exim Bank know? And maybe I'll come to the questions about Exim Bank a little later. But this is the whole picture in the run-up to the disaster which happened in April. And to me, this is nothing short of criminal negligence, to say the least. Thank you, Neha.
Thank you, Shripad. And before you go, I think it would be good to hear from you. What should the U.S. Export-Import Bank do immediately? I'm going to ask Kate a little bit to share what our engagement has been over the past year and more or less their inaction. But what do you think, Shripad, that the U.S. Exim Bank needs to do immediately?
Well, the first thing is, I would say that I completely agree with what Joe has said, that the US Exim Bank is not a bystander. It is a part and parcel of the project. It's one of the financiers of the project, and it bears equal responsibility for whatever the project causes. So I think, first of all, it must admit and accept that responsibility and its own role in the whole process, that it is complicit. It's a party to the project and party to whatever the project does, whatever happens in the project. Second thing, I think it is very important that the Exim Bank immediately puts out in the public domain whatever it has done, not just since the disaster took place in April last year, but actually even the year before that. So also the whole sequence of events in terms of when did it hear of some of the important warning signs, when did it hear of some of these notices and some of these protest actions, and what has it done all the way from a year before the disaster to today, a year after the disaster. I think the Exim Bank needs to come clean on the entire sequence of events in terms of the actions that it has taken or not taken, depending upon what has happened. In particular, I would say that they should clarify whether they knew about this notice which was given by the Pollution Control Board almost a year back. And the protest actions which the people had done, if they knew about, or the orders which the National Green Tribunal had given and yet had not been complied. So did they know about it? If they did know about it, then of course it was a very serious thing and they should have taken some action. If they didn't know about it, then the question is, why didn't the company inform them? And secondly, when the groups like Sierra Club and Center for Financial Accountability and Friends of the Earth and groups like ours, when we informed the Exim Bank about these things which had happened before the disaster, then the question is, have they taken any action in terms of those things? Have they gone back to the company and said, look, all this had happened, but you had not informed us? And also the question as to when did they exactly learn about the accident? Who told them? Did the company tell them? And what is it that they have been trying to do to ensure that not only compensation is paid, but accountability is ensured? Who was responsible for the accident? It is not just a civil case, it's also a criminal case. And I think those accountabilities and responsibilities must be ensured. And we would like to hear from the Exim Bank what it has done to ensure this accountability. Thank you.
Thank you. Hearing that very loud and clearly. And now, if we can move to Kate DeAngelis from Friends of the Earth US. If you can introduce yourself and also asking you to this is not the first time we're having this conversation, and share with us also what you know about the U.S. Export-Import Bank and how they have been acting or not acting.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Neha. So I am Kate DeAngelis with Friends of the Earth US based in Washington, D.C. And I've been working on the U.S. Export-Import Bank, trying to encourage them to not fund projects like Sasan now for about 7 years. And Friends of the Earth US more broadly has been working with allies in India as well as in other countries, trying to discourage investment for projects like this and other fossil fuel and harmful projects all over the world. And unfortunately, that message just hasn't seemed to have gotten through. As was referenced earlier, we had been trying to discourage Exim Bank from financing this project, over a decade ago. and then have continued to push XM on holding Reliance accountable, making sure that there are proper safety measures put in place. And I think time and time again, it has just shown that those warnings have gone unheeded. As was referenced earlier, the Inspector General report showed all of these issues, and that was over 5 years ago now. And obviously, those issues that were highlighted were not properly addressed, as evidenced by the continued deaths that took place. And it took, just to even understand the true impacts of this project and what were going on. I mean, it has been like pulling teeth from XM Bank. We had to file a Freedom of Information Act request to try to get information on the deaths that have occurred at this project. And that took years to figure out who has died. I mean, that's insane to me that people are dying at a US supported project and the public doesn't know about it. And I had to file a Freedom of Information Act request. I had to file an appeal to that request. And so it has just been so hard to get information about what's going on even before this incident last year. And then now, we've been we met with XM last year, shortly after the events took place. And there was, just assurances to us, oh yes, we know, we very much care, trust us that we are taking care of this and that, that we're doing all that we can. And then they were using, just saying, okay, well, COVID has limited our ability to, to address this situation. And so we're, talking to folks that are on the ground about this, to XM's contacts there. But that's proven to be completely insufficient, as evidenced by the fact that the cleanup has not occurred, even though XM has told us that it has. We have worked with members of Congress to ask questions to the former head of XM, Kim Reed, about about what is going on there. How are they going to make sure that this is that proper safety precautions are put in place? And her response was, well, we talked to Friends of the Earth and some of these other groups, and we'll get there as soon as we can travel post-COVID. And so meanwhile, at the fall of 2020, many people from XM Bank were traveling all over the world, but they never bothered to go to India. And so it was just very clear that no one from XM, or at least no one with authority, cared about what was going on there and not really taking proper precautions. Now we are hopeful with the new administration, and once there is new leadership, that they will take the situation in Sasan much more seriously than the previous administration did and take some real action. Unfortunately, XM Bank still lacks political leadership, which means that, the top positions haven't been filled. And so there's only so much, I guess, they can do. But hopefully with that political leadership in place, hopefully in the next couple months, we will see XM Bank really taking accountability and making sure that proper cleanup occurs, proper compensation, proper safety measures are put in place, and really hold Reliance accountable and make sure that the U.S. government is not funding projects like this.
Thanks, Kate. And I just want to name, I think there's an inherent privilege there. Again, I'm thinking back to what Sandeep Singh of the Union of Displaced People said in a previous call earlier this week, said, despite COVID, despite the pandemic, we are facing these impacts and we are protesting. We are moving forward with our actions. And I think there's a privilege in being based here and being so far away from the problem that you don't really have to respond to it right away. Not to say that COVID is not an issue that really impacts each and every one of us, and everybody needs to take the precautions. But that being said, the impact of even having a pandemic in place is so much more egregious for the people on the ground. And I think also just a call for this video is probably the best expression of everything and how it looks on the ground and what it looks like. Even if in the past we've only been able to bring voices to those meetings, now there are pictures, there are videos, and I think we just hope that the US XM bank and the decision makers are able to take the voices that we are amplifying for what they are saying. And then, Kate, I want to also, so right now, I shared in the beginning, there's a lot happening today. Right now, as we speak, world leaders are gathering at President Biden's climate summit. And we also know that the White House just released a climate finance plan earlier today. Can you share more about what broadly about fossil fuel finance overseas? What are the demands of some of our groups here in the US, and how has the government responded so far on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Neha. Thank you. So yeah, today is a pretty big day in the United States, as there is, as you said, a big climate summit, and there are a lot of commitments that are being made. Unfortunately, a lot of those commitments are, pretty unambitious, unfortunately, including the U.S. So the U.S. has put forward a plan to sort of phase out their support for overseas fossil fuel financing. In the plan, they're encouraging EXIM to increase its support for renewables. Congress has tried to do this in the past, and it hasn't really led anywhere. And unfortunately, there is nothing specific with regards to EXIM on setting any sort of date for ending its support for fossil fuel projects. Now they do, EXIM does have, or adheres to restrictions on support for coal plants. So hopefully EXIM would not be supporting a project like Sasan again. But as far as, there's nothing specific in the plan to officially end support for fossil fuels from EXIM Bank. The U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, which is the U.S. Development Finance Institution, which means it's an agency that, unlike EXIM, it has a development mandate. And so it's trying to encourage investment in countries to help with development. And so they did put out a plan today to be net zero by 2040. We find that completely insufficient because they're going to continue to fund fossil fuel projects all over the world until 2030. And so, it's just not really enough. EXIM is totally out of the picture with any specifics. And then DFC, hasn't really put forward sufficient targets. Unlike in other countries, the UK had just announced an end to their overseas fossil fuel financing as of March 31st, so the end of last month. And so the US is just sort of lagging behind, unfortunately.
Yeah, so overall, not the best news yet. Thank you, Kate. I think we can move now to Neil Tangury of Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives. Neil, it's great to have you on. If you can share a little bit about yourself and the organization. And I think initially it would be good to hear from you, from your experience in international climate policy and development finance. How can we strengthen this movement to ensure projects like Sasan are not financed by US government agencies?
Thank you very much, Neha. I'm glad to be here. So yes, I'm Neil Tangury. I'm the Science and Policy Director at Gaia. We're a global network of over 800 organizations in 90 countries working towards a just, equitable, zero-waste future. And so our modus operandi is this kind of transnational activism and support that is precisely what you're talking about here. I would start with sort of asking about the goals. I think that it's the objective with Sasan is not simply to get EXIM Bank to wash its hands of the project, but really to make a difference on the ground in Singrauli. And Singrauli is a place that for decades has effectively become a sacrifice zone to India's coal industry. And this is not the first issue, as we've heard, that has come up there. So really, whether it's being financed by the Exim Bank or by the World Bank or by domestic banks or Australian banks, whether they're public or private, the communities there really need help as frontline communities in this struggle for climate justice. And we should certainly be using every lever at our that we can to support them. And I think U.S. public financing is certainly a good lever to use there. So it's ridiculous that U.S. tax money is going to support this project. And one of the ideas, that has come up in the past around the Exim Bank is actually shutting down the institution altogether. There has been support from progressives in Congress in previous years. And interestingly, there's been support on the right for shutting down the Exim Bank, which they see as competing with private capital. And so I think bringing a bill in Congress to shutter Exim entirely would get their institutional attention. And even if the bill doesn't pass, in this moment, I think having a serious debate about whether Exim Bank should even exist and highlighting the Sasan project as, exhibit A for why it should not would be a good strategy. So, if there's an organization that's willing to take the lead on that, then I think it's a question of, can we get progressives in the US to support that kind of a move? And we're at a really unique moment in the US right now politically. Progressives have gained ascendancy within the Democratic Party. And I think with Biden turning into something of a surprise, a positive surprise for us, progressives have a lot more power to actually shift US policy than I think we have in the last probably 40 years. And so we should be using that. We should be active on every front. Just last week, I think it was, there was a move by the Biden administration to renege on its campaign promise to increase refugee quotas in the US. And the outpouring on simply social media alone was so negative from progressives that within one day they backed down. That is a lot of power. And we need to, I think we're so used to kind of being locked out of the doors of power and occasionally throwing some stones at the walls that we are maybe not fully inhabiting that power, and we should be using it. I think that the organizations that we represent here on this call are these kind of crucial intermediary organizations that can help organize that kind of campaign. And that is not only organizing within the US, but it is most crucially, it is about organizing in power with the people on the ground in Singrauli. We at this point have many decades of experience of what it means to do that kind of transnational organizing, how you take leadership from the people on the ground. And it's important to remember that their objectives are not necessarily going to be the objectives that first come to mind for people in the US, or that can that we can fully deliver on. So there needs to be a very open, clear, transparent, respectful communication with the leaders and the individuals on the ground there to say, how can we support their campaigns and use the leverage that we have here. There's organizations like Friends of the Earth that have been doing this for decades and have really built up a lot of experience like that. I also want to say that, we're focusing obviously on the Exim Bank because they're the entity, the US entity that's directly involved here. But it's not only about the Exim Bank. In addition to the institutions that Kate was mentioning, the US has a lot of foreign aid programs. There's even agencies like the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, in in law, one of the roles of the Environmental Protection Agency is to sell American equipment overseas, pollution control equipment. And what that usually means is that the companies that make second-rate equipment that cannot be sold in the US go to the EPA and say, help us sell our shoddy shit overseas, excuse my language. And so I've seen that happen in Malaysia. I've seen that happen in Mexico, where the EPA is actually acting as a sales booster for American companies. So it's really a cross-institutional thing that we need to be thinking about, that it's not about getting the Exim Bank to pull out of the project, because frankly, if the Exim Bank pulls out, then another entity is going to go in. It may be a private bank, which would have even less, we would have even less leverage over than if it's a public entity. I think we need to be talking about this as a much bigger question in terms of what is the U.S. role overseas. And it's also about multilateral institutions. So the agencies like the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the US has effective veto power at most of these institutions. It does not use it for the right reasons. It uses it to try to block aid to Cuba. It will not use that veto power to block investments in fossil fuel projects, in projects that are damaging people's livelihoods. An administration that is actually going to align itself with its progressive base has to start doing that in these places where, frankly, there's so many institutions and there are so many decisions that it's impossible for the NGO sector to track all of them. But we need to be on top of a few of them, and we need to use those to create broader institutional reform. So let me stop there, pass it back to you, Neha, or if there's any other questions.
Thank you so much, Neil. I think that was a really helpful synthesis of ways in which we need to be using and living into the power of the progressive voice and where we are today in the US with that progressive voice. And also this is one issue in Singrauli that has been happening for a long time and is it's resonant to so many other issues that we need to be speaking to, and it is about US policy overseas more broadly as well. Thank you, Neil, for speaking to that. And I think it's a big issue that we absolutely have to be continuing to build solidarity here in the US and transnational solidarity as well. Maureen, Nandini Mitra from Earth Island Journal, be great to hear from you. And if you can give an introduction about yourself. And then also would like to hear from you. What are the connections you see between the community struggle in Singrauli and other efforts globally to protect displaced people, lands, and biodiversity?
Sure. Hi. Thanks for having me on this panel. My name is Maureen Nandini Mitra, and I'm the editor of Earth Island Journal, which is environmental magazine that's published out of Berkeley, California, but we have an international focus, and we cover everything from a sort of intersectional lens, and in terms of environment, from wildlife conservation to climate policy. I've been with the magazine for 10 years, and I used to be a reporter in India, and I have visited a lot of these areas, the sacrifice zones that we are talking about, not Singrauli in particular, but definitely have visited a lot of coal plants and mining sites. And so I relate to what's happening on the ground there. In terms of, Neha, your question about, the interconnectedness and, what other efforts we can do to protect, displaced people, I think, this is a struggle we're seeing iterations of being played out all across the world, not just in India, definitely all over India, as there's this huge push for industrialization in the past decade and a half. I think, for me, it's almost eerie the way I see the same kind of quotes almost, like you talk to people who are being impacted, and beyond a doubt, almost always it's like the most marginalized people, the most economically marginalized, the most socially marginalized, who are impacted. And all of them tend to have this really deep connection with the land that they live in. Right now I'm feeling a report about, the folks in Louisiana who are still impacted by the oil spill, the BP oil spill that which we had the anniversary of just 2 days ago. I have a report coming in about this Canadian mine called Pan American Silver that is creating huge problems for a local indigenous community in Guatemala. So I think to have that sort of broad global understanding that, this is a struggle against sort of, in some ways, against money and power, right? It's about understanding that in some ways there's like this thread, through line through all of these struggles. And the battles are almost the same. It's about justice and accountability, and about like investing in making institutions that actually hold people accountable, that actually listen to, are more democratic. Though again, we're seeing how democracy is playing out these days. So I would say, like, if we can, as a community, think more about how, what the one battle we are fighting over here in India is connected to the other battle around, say, the lithium mine that's going to come up in Thacker Pass in Nevada, or, this silver mine in Guatemala. I think we can build stronger sort of intersectional alliances that way. And also to think about that, this is not strictly an environmental issue. This is not strictly a social justice issue. That, all of these are so deeply intertwined that you cannot, to build those alliances across sectors and movements, I think is really important.
Thank you, Maureen. That's so true. And then I have another question, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. And this question is open for you, Maureen, and also Neil. The question is, how can we strengthen our solidarity across particularly our US South Asian diaspora with efforts in Singrauli or otherwise across South Asia? The South Asian voice, particularly the progressive South Asian voice, has grown immensely in the US. So just would like to hear from you. What are your thoughts on that? And how can we strengthen our solidarity across these issues and across our places?
Sure. What I observe is that, yes, while the progressive South Asian voice has grown quite a lot, there's definitely a big generational divide still. And I think our challenge is partly how to reach across that generational divide. There's also a divide in terms of South Asians who might be first or second generation versus first generation, versus South Asians who have been here for a while. I feel like we do a good job of reaching out to the progressive South Asians, but we haven't managed to cross that barrier yet. And, when I asked, actually, I think my friend Bernali Ghosh is watching, and I asked her about this more because I feel like I'm not quite someone who's an organizer. And here's what she said. I'm just going to quote her. Go to where South Asian community gathers, write about the issues in the media they read, in vernacular media. And, so if you're in the Bay Area, go to the South Bay, find the Gujarati and the Hindi language media over there, or the Bengali language media over there. See if you can make inroads into that, Educate South Asians in their power as taxpayers and voters to ask for climate just policy where they live. I think that is, for us as progressives, that is, the reach we have to make, which I feel like we haven't managed to get to quite successfully as yet. Neil, perhaps you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would also add, I think we, as South Asians, we need to do a little more institution building. We need some more organizations that can carry that torch. We've have some local organizations that are mostly volunteer-led, that are progressive, that work on these issues. But being mostly volunteer, there's very limited capacity. The one, I would say, progressive South Asian organization that really focuses on DC, which is SALT, right? South Asian Americans Leading Together, has from the beginning refused to get involved on international questions. So they limit their focus to South Asian Americans. And so what that means is that we don't have an infrastructure for mobilizing South Asian Americans, particularly progressive South Asians, around these kinds of things. And it is left to groups like Gaia or Friends of the Earth or others who are working internationally to try to do that. But there isn't an organizational power building that happens. And so I think we actually do need to think about, we do have a critical mass of progressive South Asians in this country, particularly younger generation, particularly second generation. And I think if there are easier ways for them to plug in and for that mass to be sustained from one campaign to the next campaign, to build connections between different campaigns in different places, then we'll find it much easier to mobilize. So I would actually make a pitch for institutionalization and building our power that way.
Thank you both. I really appreciate those answers. And a lot of that resonates for me as a South Asian American, absolutely. And I'm hoping that I've had the privilege through my job at the Sierra Club to meet and get to know folks in India doing this incredible work. And Bernali, who you named, Maureen, doing similar incredible work here on the ground where I live in community. And I think it's really important to connect on the interconnectedness of our issues and to raise our voice together as much as we possibly can. And hopefully this session today was helpful for those who may not have known anything about this issue beforehand, but also to those of you that may have known a little bit to be connected to more people doing this work and to know more about what's going on, especially in Singrauli. So we have some time for questions from the audience. And while I sift through those questions and figure out where to go with that, just want to ask if any of the panelists have questions for each other. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask that question right now.
All right, I'll go. Neil, since you're talking about institutional building, I just wanted to know, is that something you're working on, or do you know people who are thinking about it, or are you going to start something?
Boy, I put my foot in my mouth, didn't I? I will say that I'm not currently working on that at the moment. I am happy to support it. You know, there were conversations about this many years ago when I lived in DC, and we had a small group. Perhaps we didn't quite have critical mass there, but you know, I think it would be a good thing to do, because I think we need to. You know, there's an India caucus in the U.S. Congress. It's not a South Asia caucus; it's an India caucus, and I think that we need to. We need to build a progressive face for South Asians, because and the organizing that is happening, the institutionalization that's happening, is happening on the right. So we see groups like Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America. We you know, we see the Modi bots starting to build those organizations, and they are the only visible face. So I think if we were to, and I shouldn't say the only one, but they are a primary visible kind of institutionalized face of the South Asian community. And so I think if we were to do this, then I think we would get a lot of support from other progressive groups. I think we would get support from groups that do transnational action. I think there's a good opportunity, but I'm not going to lead it. I will support it.
So clearly there's some work to be done in that regard, finding people who will actually start that organization and build those institutions.
I have to say, I'm very impressed with, in climate justice circles, I'm seeing young South Asian Americans in their 20s and 30s who are doing amazing work and leading all kinds of other organizations. So I think that the skills are there, the leadership is there. Yeah, I think it just needs a seed and it will coalesce.
Yeah, I think that's true. There's a question here that's asking, have there been attorneys working on behalf of the people who need compensation in Singrauli? Joe or Shripad, if you could answer that.
Shripad probably would be better placed to answer this. Shripad, are you connected?
Yeah, I will respond to that. So I think particularly in Singrauli, I think there are a number of attorneys and people taking up the whole matter in legal forums, particularly the National Green Tribunal, but also in some high courts. In fact, not directly, even directly connected to the Sasan project. There are a couple of local people who have been, filing litigation in the local courts, in the Green Tribunal. There is a person called Ashwini Dubey who has also filed a matter in this case. There are several others. So there are a whole bunch of local people who have been involved in this kind of legal fights and issues. Secondly, there is also a network of lawyers and legal support that is happening at the national level, which is sometimes supporting the local people in taking up this litigation, sometimes independently taking the litigation. For example, where the litigation cuts across several projects, then it is taken up sometimes by people who are not necessarily belonging to any one area, but say a legal group which is working at the national or regional level. So there are networks like that, and definitely in Singrauli. The problem is it's too little given the extent of the problem, given the number of accidents that keep happening, given the a large number of issues that are there. Even if you look at just coal mining and coal power plants, the large number of accidents, the large number of disasters, violations. This is really, really very, very little. That's one part. Second part is the legal system just not able to deliver justice in the true sense. These litigations keep on dragging and dragging. You get some small good order at some point of time, it doesn't get implemented, so people have to fight even to get the order implemented. So I think those are also kind of important issues there. Yeah, thank you. Joe, you may want to add something.
No, I don't have anything more to add. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, another question. How do millions of US tax dollars get used in such projects that do not meet the US environmental or safety standards? I think Kate or Neil, if you want to take that one.
Yeah, sure. I can hop in here first. Once again, Kate from Friends of the Earth. So yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's billions, not millions. There was almost $1 billion that went towards this project. And, it's a really good question. They do look at environmental impact assessments. I think the problem is we often find that these are pretty flawed. They often do a very weak alternatives assessment, and they just don't look at the full scope of environmental impacts. So they'll find that they can be properly remediated or addressed. And so one of the things, with this project with Sasan, we said, the impacts are going to be much worse than what you claim that they will be. And sure enough, that has happened. And so unfortunately, there's often a great underestimation of what the impacts will be. And then they often just brush them off and say, yeah, they trust that the company will remediate or will address these impacts. And then they never follow up to make sure that happens. And so it's one of the things where there are good requirements on the books, but then they're not really properly implemented, in my opinion.
Neil, did you want to add to that?
So I'm having some connectivity issues. I'll pass on that, actually, because I didn't hear Kate's answer and I don't want to be redundant.
Okay, we are able to hear you now. But this next question, maybe some of you can address. I think the question is, how can we partner and connect with the different organizers represented to continue to spread awareness and be informed, knowing that there are these barriers? Global media outlets are controlled by 3 major corporations. Also, the Democratic and conservative groups work jointly on these projects, like pharmaceuticals to corporate gains jointly. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll hop in first and let others speak as well. But I think this is where the power of social media is really salient, because when I started working on these issues more than 20 years ago, it was extremely difficult to bring attention to something like this, that if the mainstream media didn't feel like it had direct bearing on Americans, or they wouldn't have the story read, it was very difficult to get any kind of press interest in this. We can now, with a smart social media campaign, we can actually build from the bottom up. And I think that we can put items on the agenda despite that kind of gatekeeping that's being discussed. So I think it's about organizing, and it's about social media campaigns, and then we can, and obviously it's about going to members of Congress and getting progressives there to raise questions about this. I'll pass it on to anyone else.
I can add, when we are talking about media, Neil raised an important point about, social media has sort of democratized some of how you disseminate information, but there's also independent media, Earth Island Journal, thank you, that does cover these issues, and I think maybe part of the challenge is often that organizations always think that, this needs to be in the New York Times, this needs to be in Washington Post. But the fact is, because the internet exists, you can put those stories out there and you can put them in smaller, maybe independent media, and then it does get amplified and picked up by other media. Just for a small example, Earth Island Journal is read by reporters who write for the New Yorker or the New York Times. So they often pick up stories that are published in smaller outlets and then write about that. So if you're finding it hard to get what you're writing about, what you want to raise in the big media, so to speak, try the smaller ones, try the local ones. There is a way to amplify and, reach out to, through a sort of gradual increasing of volume of attention a particular issue gets, and take advantage of a smaller independent media in that regard.
Thanks, Maureen. And I also want to lift up a story some of you may know of organizing that was done on the ground in Bangladesh, in India, and here in the US, some in Europe, South Asians across these places against the Rampal coal-fired power plant and coal buildup in the Sundarbans of Bangladesh. And I truly believe it was this transnational organizing, the fact that we lobbied at the US Exim Bank, all of those pieces actually ended up leading to the cancellation of one of the planned plants. This happened a few years ago. So I think that really it is about these kinds of conversations, putting the actions in place, reaching out to every media source, as Maureen is saying, and social media campaigns, building the power of our progressive voice and strengthening the capacity there. I also wanted to uplift, we have an action right now that you can take. If we'll put it in the comment box and in the video itself. Please sign this action. All of our petitions, our thousands of petitions that Friends of the Earth US and Sierra Club have collected, are going to the US Export-Import Bank, and this is an ongoing campaign. We absolutely expect that our demands will be met, especially by the US Exim Bank. And then one final question, which should be a fairly quick answer. The question is, can the issues of Sasan be brought as a human rights violation to the World Court / the UN? Does anybody want to speak to that?
I unfortunately don't know the answer to that. I don't know, unfortunately, on what grounds it would be brought. I'm not familiar with that, although I can say that there, I know that there's research being done now about how to hold export credit agencies accountable for international violations of international law. So that could be a means for holding Exim Bank accountable, or and then I know just within India that others on the call can speak to more to that. That they are trying to hold Reliance officials accountable within India for that.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. And I think the story I just mentioned about the Sundarbans in which sit across Bangladesh and India is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So in that scenario, we were able to hold UNESCO accountable to preserving this World Heritage Site. I think that remains a challenge for a place like Singrauli, which I sometimes refer to it when I've been there as the Appalachia of India, which has been ravaged by this pollution and coal and mining for so very long. But I think definitely a point to be raised. So I think that is all the questions I see, and we are at time. So I do want to appreciate everybody's time, and thank you so much for joining this conversation. Thank you so much, especially to our panelists for joining. India, I know that it is late there, so thank you for joining as well. For the audience, if there's two things we want you to walk away with today, one is all of these issues that have been happening in Singrauli. We want to hold the US Export-Import Bank equally responsible, particularly for what has happened with this coal ash disaster and the inaction that has followed. Please sign our action. We've shared the petition link. Please sign that action, and we will be following up with you as well. And then the second piece is, this is a bigger issue. It's an issue of US policy overseas and how we finance, and that we should not finance fossil fuels overseas. We, as the United States, have a responsibility to the most vulnerable communities on the front lines of the climate crisis, especially having been one of the largest emitting countries and cause of the climate crisis. The US under Biden administration seems to be getting back on track, but we cannot forget the voices of our grassroots leaders and activists who continue to fight and raise up their asks for decades. We'll be soon sharing details about a Grassroots Leaders Climate Summit that Friends of the Earth US and Sierra Club are organizing, and we hope that everyone will look to participate in that soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Neha, for organizing.
Thank you, Neha.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.